Welcome to Lock It Down Sports. I'm your host, Locke Hoover. And as always, you can follow me on Twitter at Lock It Up Media. That's Lock It Up Media on Twitter. You can also check us out at E5280 Sports. That's E5280 Sports. And today on Lock It Down Sports, is it really worth it for this conference to add schools? How Caleb Williams really is a smart, shrewd businessman, and how Matt Rhule is a little off his rocker with some of these comments. But first, I want to get into this, and that is college football had some interesting numbers and ratings and data on CBS. They did a really good job with this piece, and it's data going back to 2014. So I put a little work into it. And one of the things that they did was one score game percentages. So in these one score games, the Big 12 had one score games at 42.32% of the time. The ACC had one score games at 42.21% of the time. RIP the Pac-12, I just wanted to do it for some fun, had a one score percentage rate of 38.52%. The SEC had a 37.01% one score rate, and the Big Ten had a 35.68 one score rate percentage, and that's conference games. So that's Florida versus Tennessee, Georgia versus Florida, Ohio State, Michigan, Ohio State, Purdue, etc. So that's what the in-conference games, the data percentage rates was. And those, I think, in the Big 12, I think those numbers are going to stay the same. I really do. And maybe even closer, have a higher percentage of one-score games because there's no more Texas, there's no more Oklahoma in that conference. I mean, I think it's a very much a similar pot of schools with the addition of Utah, with the addition of Arizona, the addition of Arizona State. You throw that into a lump of schools that it's, okay, sometimes it's TCU's pretty good. Sometimes it's Texas Tech. Sometimes it's Oklahoma State. I mean, all these schools are very much, if that school comes out and wins the conference, okay, yeah, I buy it, And that's what that is. It's going to be a lot closer, I think, congested conference as a whole. And I think those numbers are going to back it up. I'm really interested to kind of see some of the data this year with that conference to see where those numbers line, where they're going. Now, I think the ACC very much in the same situation. I think they're gonna have more closer games as well, with the additions of Cal, Stanford, and SMU. Like I said, from very much the Big 12, all fall in the same pot as similar to Pitt, similar to Boston College, NC State. All these are very similar type programs, up years, down years, so years, 6-6 years, could have close games. The Pac-12, rest in peace, I think the SEC is going to have some closer games as well, with the addition of Texas and Oklahoma, playing Georgia, playing Alabama. Tennessee's getting a lot better, so you can throw Tennessee in there, LSU, these close games with Texas and Oklahoma. So it's going to be a very much I think a closer conference for some of these closer games as well. Now, the Big Ten, I think, will continue to have the least amount of one-score games, with the addition of Oregon, Southern Cal, UCLA, and Washington. And why, you might ask that? I mean, it's very much a conference run by Ohio State and Michigan. You throw in Oregon, that's your big three right there. can continue to pound teams, I believe. And then sometimes Southern Cal, sometimes Washington. I know, although they are playing well right now, obviously. We'll see what happens in the next few years with the board not there. And then the always, sometimes third, fourth fiddle in Penn State. That's where that conference is at. And it's going to be very much the same if you ask me with it when it comes to these schools when it comes to competition. So you asked me, Locke, what about the other end of things? Exactly. So the blowouts. Blowouts are considered by 17 or more points, which I think is a good parameter. So a three score game, basically. ACC has the least amount of blowouts at 37.667%. Big 12 was second lowest with 39.72%. Pac-12, just for funsies, 41.8%. SEC, 42.72%. And then had the most blowouts, the Big 10, at 46.85%. And I think it's really easy to kind of figure out a lot of these numbers. I mean, obviously, Clemson and Florida State are the ringleaders in the ACC for the blowouts. Maybe the last few years, it's of course been Clemson because Florida State's been up and down. But Florida State in there as well. As like I said, I think these numbers go back 10 years. So 2014. So there's a good amount of data on these schools with the close games and the blowouts. So 2014 is a very good sample size. And of course, the coaching changes as well. Now, the Big 12, I think is clearly it's Texas and Oklahoma that has the majority of these blowout games. I mean, even when you look at it with TCU, when they made their run to the national championship game, they weren't blowing out schools. They were winning by 3, 7, maybe 10 points, but every one of their games was close. So even a team that made to the Natty and got hammered was not blowing out schools and teams in their conference. So this brings me to the SEC. Everyone assumes it's Alabama and Georgia, correct? You know, it's those two schools, and then the conference is pretty weak as a whole. It's those two schools carrying the mantle and the banner, right? Well, I wouldn't say so, and here's why. So out of the 508 games, 41 of those are Alabama, 37 of those are Georgia. So that's only a 15.35% clip of those games from those two schools together in the blowout fashion. And I think that to me really shows like the strength of the conference as the whole of the blowouts. Yeah, you have the close games, but the top and bottom of the conference really shows the depth of the conference as a whole between different schools and different programs. And even your top two schools the last 5 years, they even went back 10 years, or 9 years. It's about to be the 10th year. Only a 15.35 clip of blowout. Those teams are blowing out other conference games. And these are just, like I believe I said, I don't remember if I did earlier, these are just conference games. So this is Alabama, Mississippi State, Alabama, Arkansas, Tennessee, Florida, etc. Not Ole Miss, SMU, Alabama, Middle Tennessee State University. You know, none of those None of those schools like that. Just conference games. And that's the example of, to me, it shows the depth of the conference that I think some really hate and try to avoid getting credit from, because I hear the talk, I see it on Twitter. Well, if it wasn't for Alabama, the SEC would suck. If it wasn't for Georgia winning the national championship, the SEC would suck. Like, really? You got to look at the conference as a whole. And I think that really irks a lot of people to actually look at the full conference and not just teams in the SEC winning national championships. And the strength of the conference is there. The proof is in the pudding, as they like to say. And speaking of conferences, I think this is going to be really a unique situation to watch. And that's the Mountain West and the 2024-2025 season. You're like, wow, the Mountain West. Why is it so unique? They're just one of the non-Power 5 conferences looking to get a playoff spot. Yes, they're the leader in the clubhouse, if you ask me. But Oregon State and Washington are going to be playing their conference schedule. So they're going to be pseudo Mountain West conference members the next 2 years. And if you ask me, I think this could be a good litmus test for the Mountain West to see if those two schools are a good fit for that conference and if they really help them from a competitive standpoint. Is it really worth adding an Oregon State, a Washington State, when you're probably the best, most likely conference to get an automatic bid into the college football playoffs? Yeah, you're probably not going to get one every year, but based on how the setup is now and the schools in your program, you've got the best teams in there. Do you really want to theoretically bring in the two best schools available in Oregon State and in Washington State to potentially take your bid, Boise State, your bid, Fresno State, some pop years from, say, an Air Force or San Diego State? Do you want to potentially give up that bid? Not give it up, but be a harder bid for you to gain, secure that bid in that playoff spot? I don't know. I don't know if it's really worth it for that conference. As granted, it's all reports, but they're only projected to add 10 to 15% in the TV deal as far as revenue goes. So a 10 to 15% bump if you add those two schools. Also, you got to think about it as well. If they were to come in, they're coming in with a lot of money to work with, at least in the initially up front, with the Pac-12 money they've got and the CWTV deal they have as well. And they're getting this Pac-12 money from basketball tournament, NCAA tournament. So, units that they pay off, through a 6-year span of, that bowl game money and just other things as well as a whole. So they're going to be coming with that money in the initial, and they're going to be having a lot more money to wheel and deal and operate with as well. I mean, I don't think it's going to be a welcoming addition. I think on both fronts. I think the Mountain West is almost a last resort for Oregon State and Washington State, as they want to get in the Big 12. Yeah, they love to get in the Big 10, but I think they're a realistic spot is the Big 12. And there's been rumors now with the Big 12 trying to get to 24 schools, take some schools from the ACC, and then, okay, sure, come on, Washington State, come on, Oregon State, to have a big just group of schools, but a sustainable conference that's not going anywhere. I think short term, they're going to stay independent, kind of, or pseudo 2 years worth of Mountain West play, and then see if there's any gaining interest before those two schools, and I think the Mountain West, really makes a play and a decision for what's going to happen, what's going on with those two programs. Now, speaking of a program that hasn't done jack, they've got a big talker in Matt Rhule. And I get it. He's coming in. It's Big Ten Media Days. And as they like to say, it's talking season, right? He said the Big Ten is like the NFL of college football. And I read that, I was like, well, that's quite a take. And after reading his quotes, on one instance, I agree with him. And that instance is referring to the Big Ten coast to coast like the NFL. So, yeah, absolutely. You know, you got Maryland and Boston College, to Southern Cal, to UCLA, to Oregon, to Washington. East Coast to West Coast, absolutely different climates as well. You know, you got Middle America, Penn State, Michigan, Purdue. Then you got the coasts on both sides with the rain, maybe potentially up in Oregon and Washington. Sunny and 75 at Southern Cal and UCLA. And then you can get the East Coast hotness out of Maryland, out of Boston College. And then obviously the snow everywhere from Boston College to Michigan to Wisconsin. So, yeah, that's a very fair assessment on that. And on the other instance, though, here's where I disagree with what he said, saying their conference should have easy access to 4 teams each year in the playoffs. He's basically saying he thinks they should be guaranteed 4 spots. So I was like, let me look at this. So 2014, they had 4 schools in the top 12. 2020, they had 2 schools in the top 12. 2021 had 3 schools. 2022 had 5. 2023, they had 5 schools in the national championship in Michigan. So that's 19 total. And with that, I was counting Oregon, Washington, etc. in that count of the 4 schools, the 5 schools, the 3 schools, etc. And I don't think there's going to be as many in the top 12 in the following years, because some of those schools are going to be playing each other. They're going to have 1, 2 losses or 3 losses now. They're not going to be in that top 12 because they're going to beat up on each other. You got Oregon and Washington come in to join the party. You know, a school might have 2 losses. Oregon might lose to Washington and Michigan. They're on the cusp of they're in that 10 to 12 range. Same thing, Ohio State. They lose to Michigan or Washington and Oregon, 3 losses, no chance. They lose to Oregon and Michigan. The cusp of anywhere from 8 to 12 range, depending on what other conferences are doing, what the SEC is doing. That brings me to the SEC. So 2019, had 5 schools in the top 12. Oh, yeah, was also the national champion. 2020, 5 schools was also the national champion. 2021, 3 schools, also the national champion. 2022, 3 schools, also the national champion. And then 2023 last year had 6 schools in the top 12. 22 total schools in that span of years. I think also where there's some problem, there's some rub with that, with what he's saying is guaranteed 4 schools. One of those top 12 spots is going to a non-conference school. So really you're working with 11 spots, and 11 spots is really what you're working with as a whole. And of course you get 2 guaranteed. You get 3 guaranteed. You have up to 3 guaranteed. Just like the SEC has up to 3 guaranteed. And then the other conferences have up to 2 guaranteed to get in. It's not a foregone conclusion they're getting 4 in a year. And I think what he was also trying to say is pump up his conference. The Big Ten were the best conference in the league. We're the best conference around. Well, a little bit more proof to that false statement. For the last handful of years, you can go back and look it up. The SEC has had more draft picks in the NFL. They had last year, the previous year, the year before that. It's well known. The SEC has had the most draft picks in the NFL for the last handful of years. Also, to a lesser extent on this end, it's not as much of a thing, but I think it is kind of telling. The SEC has better recruiting classes as a conference as a whole. As a whole conference, they have better recruiting rankings. Now, take that as you may, because yeah, there's something to it. Ultimately, it's of course getting kids to the league, but the top kids want to go play in the SEC. They view that and value that as the primo league, as a conference, as a whole. So I hear you, Matt Rhule. I understand you're back in your conference and your league. Fortunately, he wasn't saying his team because, boy, Nebraska has struggled mightily. Mightily. I think he can get that program turned back to the highlights and the promised land of being a competitive, competent program. I mean, we've seen what he did at Baylor and the build he did at Baylor. Why can't he do it at Nebraska? Program that's dying to have a successful football program as one of the more historic programs in the country, the Cornhuskers of Nebraska. Now, I thought this was incredibly smart, but on the initial front, I was scratching my head trying to figure out why Caleb Williams hadn't signed his rookie contract yet. It was like, it's pretty much a set in stone what you're getting based on where you're drafted, obviously, number one. Why haven't you signed your 4-year, $39 million contract? It's like, what's going on? What's the deal? Sign it. Get to start practicing, get into your team, et cetera, et cetera. But He was trying to get creative, and I love it. And what I mean by that is this. So Illinois' tax rate is 10.25%. 10.25%. And here's what he wanted to do. He was following the laws. He was following the Illinois laws and the Chicago laws that were in place. He was trying to make his deal an LLC. Why you might do that? He asked. In Illinois, you don't have income tax on LLCs. That was one thing he was trying to do. Another thing he was trying to do is to make his deal a forgivable loan so he would not have to pay taxes on his deal until the loan is forgiven for up to 10 years in the future. Obviously, he's going to have the money, but you invest it, the interest, and then, you make more money on that initial deal. I love it. Creative, very well done. And the league said no to both deals. So one of the reasons for the first one is that Williams can't go to a business entity other than the player. Okay. They didn't give a reason for the second one. Didn't give a reason for the forgivable loan. And I think this is incredible. This is an incredible idea to try this idea. I mean, if you're following the law and can avoid paying taxes, more power to you. I'd do it. I mean, hasn't any and every business tried to avoid paying taxes? I mean, heck, you see it all the time, especially now. Businesses are leaving California and New York, and where are they moving to? Florida, Texas, Tennessee. Why? No state income tax. There's no taxes. I don't blame them. But fortunately, Caleb Williams can't do that because he plays for the Browns, the Bears. And he wants to avoid paying those taxes as much as possible because players have to pay taxes on each state they play in. So, and that's all leagues. So whenever he plays in California, he has to pay California taxes. Whenever he plays the Falcons, he has to pay Georgia taxes. Whenever he plays the Browns and the Bengals, got to pay Ohio taxes. And that's all states, and that's all professional teams. So the Braves players, for example, have to pay taxes on each state they play in. They go to New York, they got to pay New York taxes, et cetera, et cetera, on top of their home state taxes. So I get it, trying to avoid having to pay a higher tax when you live in a higher tax city and state. Now, I don't know. I would venture to guess if the NFL found and the owners found a way to avoid paying taxes, I think they would, right? Why? Because that's smart business. No one likes paying taxes. I don't blame them. I really don't. I think it's a smart try, a shrewd business plan, an idea from Caleb Williams and his team. And you know what? Bravo. Well done. Bravo, bravo, bravo. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Lock It Up Media. That's Lock It Up Media on Twitter. You can also follow us at E5280 Sports. That's E5280 Sports. I'm Locke Hoover. You've been listening to Lock It Down Sports. Talk to you next week.